All right, we're going to jump in. You are probably wondering why there's two guys up here at a conference about gender, and one of them's a white guy in a session about race. I first want to thank everybody. This is an important piece, right, for being here, so thanks for being here. One of the things that I've learned around this is when talking about race, it's really important for white people to talk to white people. It's also really important when talking about gender for men to talk to men. So again, thanks for taking away time from your days to be here. I know that there are a bunch of people back at Wieden Kennedy in Portland that have helped me get on this stage. There's quite a few women of color, some specific individuals that have helped me learn what I've learned and start me on this journey to get on this stage. And there's one woman in particular that I'm going to talk about that really was the Kickstarter, and it's my wife, Amy. Amy is a principal at a K-8 school, Sunnyside Environmental School in Portland, Oregon. And she, like the entire Portland Public School District, went through some equity training. But this equity training was a little bit different. It was completely profound to her. It changed her in a way that it was transformative, is really the best term I can come up with right now. And that training came into our house. It became really personal. And it was, how are we going to raise our two white kids in white Portland, Oregon, with it in this day and age? And the conversations got a little heated, I'll be honest. It got to the point where I had to defend myself. I'm like, no, I was raised in Denver, Colorado. My parents are progressive. I was raised colorblind. I don't see color. We're all just people, right? And that kind of teetered over the edge, and it escalated a little bit forward. We kind of had a little bit of a battle royale. This turned into I was starting to sweat, and where am I going to sleep tonight? It turned into kind of the conversation that was really, really uncomfortable. Well, through that, I also have to remember, she's a principal. Principals, it's not a very passive job at all. And to be honest, she's a total badass, which is great. So with our conversations, and as they escalated, I started to realize I'm getting caught up in the buzz terms, diversity and inclusion and culture. But what it really came down to is belonging. And we need to get to a place where everybody feels like they belong. So in the meantime, working at Wieden Kennedy, Dan Wieden has been very outspoken about race and our industry being a very white industry. So that's going on in my work life. In my home life, my wife is taking on this equity training that is transforming her. It's coming to our house. Again, we had a little bit of a personal fight in our bedroom about me being a racist, kind of, is what she even called me that at some point in time. And my presentation disappeared. It's coming back, I swear. And in that, I said, okay, how do I bring this to my work life? I'm taking it on as a personal person. How do I take it into my professional life and into work? And I knew that it had to come to Wieden Kennedy. And so, I'm going to come closer to my laptop. And so I had to meet Glenn. And in Glenn, we talked about, Glenn and I got on the phone and we talked about this battle royale that my wife and I had. And I was like, hey, thanks for taking the time to talk. What are the next steps we take to get into this conversation and bring it to my work life? Because Wieden has a really great platform. Dan Weiden's given us his permission. And Glenn's like, did you say battle royale? Do you know where the term battle royale came from? And I was like, yeah, it's WWF, WrestleMania 6. I've been a fan forever. Glenn's like, no, unfortunately, a battle royale is when you put a group of slaves in the ring in a circle, you blindfold them, you put one boxing glove on them, and you wait and see which is the last man standing. That was an uncomfortable conversation. So here I am with Glenn, okay, how do we get into this work? And the first thing I do is pretty much offend Glenn. Talk about being uncomfortable. I learned to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And we had to work through that. And I still thought, okay, how do we bring this to work? Somehow. And there was something that Dan said in 2009 at an ad agency award show, and I'm going to play that snippet for you because this really resonated with me.
I ended up asking myself a very serious question. I said, what do you really, really care about? What's really driving you nuts? And if you could change one thing before you check out of this world, what would it be? And that was actually a pretty simple answer. And this issue continues to gnaw on me because, like it or not, in this business, I essentially hire a bunch of white, middle-class kids, pay them enormous sums of money to do what? To create messages to the inner city. The kids who create the culture, the white kids, are trying to hell to emulate. But if you go into the inner city, odds are these kids aren't even going to see advertising as a possibility, as an opportunity for them. And now that's fucked up. I mean, it is, I'm sorry, but don't get me wrong, I'm not bringing this up today because I think White Kennedy is doing this phenomenal goddamn job of rectifying the situation. I think we've made some progress, but we've got miles and miles to go before we sleep.
So I knew that somehow I had to introduce Dan to Glenn. We're going to talk that from there.
So Scott just taught me how to do keynote on my phone.
And it works on your phone, but not mine.
I broke just now. So I'm really learning how to do this. Has been my experience with Wyden. Okay, I came with handouts and PowerPoints because Amy was my student. His wife was my student, and we were working together to improve achievement for students of color in Portland, and knocked it out of the park. And so they were having this interaction at home because this work begins personally. Right? And if the people assembled aren't going to do their personal work, then the institutions, the industry is not going to change. Right? And this means also that if the people who are in charge are not going to do their personal work, then all of us who are working for these folks are not going to be able to get as far as we want to go. And so this meeting with Dan was an important one, and very similar to lots of older white men that run companies. He has a vision. He has a heart. We all know what it is that we want to do and why we want to do it. But how do we do it? Right? And that's the big distinction here. This is about a how. Because we agree that we got to deal with racial disparity. We agree that we got to deal with gender disparity. But how do we go about doing it? And so Dan's how was to introduce me to Keisha. Okay? And Keisha, right back there. Keisha, could you just like stand up for a minute? Because normally Keisha and I have been together trying to hone down 2 days of work to 2 hours. And then thank you, Kat Gordon, to invite us to do it in 1 hour. Okay? With my new white guy. Because it's the man-ambassador. So he's the man-ambassador.
You should give me your remote.
Right? And so, mine's
ahead.
work now?
Yeah, it is, but you're going ahead on yourself.
Oh, why don't you do it? So basically, in that intersection of race and gender, which is beyond gender as the theme for the conference, the reason why I wanted you also to meet Keisha is because she embodies that. And in order for this work to actually work at Wyden, it had to be something that worked for Keisha. And so one of the unspoken conversations is that you cannot really deal with gender disparity completely without dealing with race. Because what will happen is there will be a modicum of change for white women, and women of color will fall behind. And so the ultimate litmus test, really, is how are women of color doing in the industry? And what role do each of us play? Particularly those of us who have male privilege, but also those who have white privilege. What role do each of us play in creating the space for all women, which means where are the women of color? And so that's the intersection, and the work of going beyond gender means that we're just going into this space right here, which is completely genderized, but it's also racialized. And so over here in this race space, we have a how to talk about race. And that's what we also apply then, to be able to talk about race, race and gender, race and sexual orientation, religion, whatever the case may be. These intersections are critical. And so we're going to introduce 3 reasons why we do it this way. Okay? And the why we do it this way is the backdrop of how we do it. So we're also going to give you an opportunity to sample the how. Okay, so you can see how this differs from a traditional approach to diversity. Okay. So the first part is that race matters, and it doesn't just matter when the client wants a more racially diverse team. And every time I say race matters, you say gender matters also. Okay? And you also say sometimes gender is going to matter a little bit more in this situation, or race is going to matter a little bit more in this situation. But you got to be able to interchange them. And you got to also understand that at the heart of it, particularly here in the United States, if you sidetrack race, you don't get to the fullness of any other aspect. Okay? And so the second then is that before you can deal with racial disparity or gender disparity, you have to be able to talk about it. And you have to be able to sustain that conversation and take that conversation to a place where in and of itself, the conversation is transformative. Okay, and so that's what was happening at home. So Scott couldn't come into work and do his job the same way because of the conversations they were having at home. And it's transformative because they also have children at home who are depending on them to be able to make this right. Okay, and so as Amy was able to, before her work at Sunnyside in racial equity, make sure that she stewarded Scott on his sexism, she was also now coming home and not only calling him sexist, but calling him racist. That's the intersection. And he's here today to talk about it.
Yep. That's called learning.
Right. All right, and so that's what it means in this track, because it's one thing to sit here for an hour and even see how it's done, but it's more to sit here, really go through it as a personal transformation, and then come in and actually teach others how to do it. And that's what leadership is. Okay, and so ultimately, before we can get to courageous leadership, which is here now, we have to be able to have a conversation about the battle royal. And we have to have read Invisible Man to know of that reference. Okay, long before, what is it, WWF? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, third level is about systems change versus random acts of equity. Okay, and random acts of equity are these good programs that are happening all over the world, all industries, and on paper each of them looks great, but they don't add up to changing the organization. And usually when the person who loves the program most leaves and goes to a different organization, so goes the quality of that program. And so it has to get deeper into the policies of the organization. It has to get into the lifeblood. It has to get into the belief system, right? And so again, transformation is really about transforming the essence of who we are. It's the culture, okay? And so what does all that mean? Well, race matters, okay? It means gender matters. This next one will give a nice indication because this is Sonia Sotomayor. Okay? And so there is no reason that we can't show race and gender to make the statements that are critical. And her movement onto the Supreme Court actually is a good way for us to understand this idea of why race matters. And she gives us 3 basic principles. First, race matters because of the history of racial inequity. Okay? And folks don't like to have conversations about enslavement and internment and genocide of indigenous people, but in reality, it's still happening. Okay? And we do liken some of the aspects. In fact, the coach talks about these things of the prisoners and, the prisoners running the prison or something. I don't know how I can't get myself to say stuff like that. But we're still in this aspect of not including people, but building systems that are exclusive. And so that's from our history. The second is that we have these persistent racial disparities today. We have these persistent gender disparities today. So even if you don't want to study the history and know why those references like Battle Royale are critical, you can just look at the current numbers. Unless you believe that women are inferior in some kind of way, which by definition makes you sexist, okay, then you have to be disturbed by the disparity. And the only reason why that disparity is there is because the system is set up for that disparity. And the system will do exactly what it's designed to do until you interrupt it. And so when we don't see more than half of the population at the highest levels being women, we know that we have a sexist system. And so when we don't see more than half of the people of color at the highest level, we have a racist system. Otherwise, we're just racist. And rather than walk out of the room holding that, I'm just racist, that's why. It's better to attack the system. But when you attack the system's going to fight back because the system's taught each of us to fight for it. And so that's what we're exploring in ourselves. We're exploring how do we become the way in which the system perpetuates itself on race and gender. Okay, third thing she said, though, is if we don't challenge the system, then we're going to have all kinds of ramifications, economically, socially, culturally speaking. And so we don't get the best of who we are when we operate in a system designed not to support each and every one of us. Okay, when we change systems to be actual places where people feel a sense of belonging, you actually get the best work. And at the end of this hour, we're going to be able to show you those artifacts because an agency is producing the best work that it's ever produced in its history. Just because people can show up fully and bring the gifts that they have from their experiences. And so she says, speak openly and candidly on the subject of race. Speak openly and candidly on the subject of race. She was arguing about the Voters' Rights Act. She's been arguing about affirmative action. All of those things that we've built into the system to correct it. Okay, that are the hotly contested aspects in our society today. There's nothing more politically unstable than affirmative action policy. And that's because people never decided in this country that they wanted affirmative action policy. It's a presidential executive order. Okay, and so it's fought all the time. But that's the only remedy in the United States to address racial disparity. So that's the same thing for Title IX. Title IX is designed to address gender disparity. Without it, we don't get that in college athletics. Okay? And so we have to look for the equivalent of your policy in your organization for Title IX, for affirmative action. Okay? And so this is what we mean when we say race matters. As you move forward, you also then see this in data.
I'm coming back.
Okay? And so the data slide before.
It's coming, I swear.
This guy's
Try to-
overhead.
Overhead.
This
Overheads.
presentation, White and Kennedy, they're like threw stuff at the screen. It was just so horrible to these creative people. And now we can okay.
Let's try a different clicker.
Basically, what this is showing is it's showing the lack of diversity among CEOs in our Fortune 500. And we code it really easily so that you can see. But after a certain point, because the system always operates the way that the system operates, you don't even need that code on the left side. You know that this bottom line, they're the darkest people in our country. Okay? And the top line is white. All right? So all data starts to just be predictable in that way because the system works the way the system was designed to work. And so each of us keep needing to ask ourselves, to what degree am I the chief perpetuator of the system in my organization? And before I do my organization, I have to look at how I do it at home. And that's what Amy was saying to Scott. We can't do it this way at home, and you expect me to go into a school and change what's going on in terms of achievement disparity. We can't do it this way at home, now Scott and me go into Wieden and Kennedy and not deal with these disparities that are every day. Okay, so this is the Fortune 500 more graphically. Okay, and now 3%. You see one black woman of all black and brown people at the Fortune 500 CEO level. There are only 16 out of 500. Okay, and one woman, when this was created about a year ago, she's not there anymore. Ursula Burns is gone. Okay, and so this is race and gender. Absent, completely absent. Keisha is not there. So how can she come in the next level and really affect change in the organization when she's not present? And this is the issue. Okay? That's another way of looking at it. Those who can't relate with the faces, now we go to advertising, we bring it closer to home. Same population. Okay? Black and brown folks, the highly politically charged African American group, the fastest growing group of people of color in the United States, Latinos, brown. Okay, and this is what it looks like in all of advertising, and then at the highest level of leadership, 12%. So we go from 27% participation for those two groups to 12%. 12% is lower, smaller than just the African American population. Okay? So this is the why, in case you didn't have the why. All right? The real reason is race matters because of that history, and it shows in the current realities. Okay? And so we need to be able to talk about this, and this is the how part. Many organizations have said for 25 years of my work that, yeah, we need to do this. That's the why. And we want to get to this place, as Dan said. He wants an industry that reflects the population. That's the what. But the how. Dan, how are you going to do that? And then the ideas become really lofty and big. And it's something quite simple. We have to learn how to talk about this to each other every day, particularly when we're doing our most important work together. All right, so into the courageous conversation.
So we've had 500 or so of the Wieden employees that have gone through this 2-day workshop. I was actually explaining to Glenn earlier, it's really impressive to see our executive levels put down their phones for 2 days. It's a very demanding industry, but they phones down, 2 days all in. Took a little bit to get us there, but we're there. Of those 500 employees, I would love for them to come here and actually share their experiences. That would be a really powerful thing to do because it is very personal. But what we did is we had some brilliant people capture those shortly after the 2-day workshop and put in a little film together. So we'll have you watch that. Yours is, but I'm scared to move it.
Of an ideology that was created.
Because at times I can't be myself culturally of who I am, and the way my name is said. My name is not Romero, my name is Ramiro.
To separate, we had 150 people in my graduating class, and I was the only brown student. and conquer.
I just want to be viewed as someone who's good at their job and excels because of the work they do and not necessarily because of the color of my skin.
And deny.
My partner's white and I'm Latino, and we walk into stores and, you know, people follow me around. You know, this very thing happened like 3 weeks before, and I made it obvious to him. I was like, this woman's following me around, you noticed that, right? And he was like, she was. That's weird. Well, maybe it was just because, you know, this or this. And I'm like, no, it's because I'm Latino.
And infiltrate really the minds and bodies and souls of people.
We did intern presentations this week. And one of the interns wore a suit and tie, or he wore a tie. And someone made a flippant comment which was, oh, are you going to court? Now that's a minority person wearing a suit, dressed up because they're going to do a presentation. And the response is, you're going to court. Not, did you have a job interview? Not, did you just come from a funeral? But, oh, you're going to court. So that's where the bar is. That's the reality.
There's a lot of things that we've overcome over the ages, and this can be one of them.
Race is a thing that I think most of us would just have feelings about it, but don't really feel compelled to start talking about it.
People are so afraid to offend one another and so afraid to talk about race. It's just that big elephant in the room.
It's called courageous conversations because it takes courage to allow yourself to be vulnerable to what you're really feeling, and then to say it to other people.
Yeah, I think I just saw it and I was like, HR training.
Been through many conversations about diversity, but they never lead anywhere.
It was, oh fuck, I haven't got time. I've got 17 fires going on.
I think the first year left us with a lot of raw emotion.
A lot of the people that I work with were oblivious to how I'm living versus them.
We talked about feel harder and how for a lot of people in the agency it doesn't, feel harder doesn't necessarily resonate. I don't feel like I can feel harder. I feel like my window of failure is much smaller.
It's not a level playing field, and it's not really his problem to solve, that's our problem to solve, because we want people to come here to feel safe and to do the best work of their lives, and for us to allow that, promote that, and he's been put in the worst position. That's ours to solve. I would have not known that before these days.
There are definitely times in Portland where you walk, or where you feel like you're the only person of color. Not feel like. There have been times when you're at a restaurant and you look around, there's no one else who looks like you.
You have this realization that I am completely fucking oblivious to the experience of other people that I work so closely with, and I am completely fucking oblivious to my own privilege.
I was kind of blown away at the problems that we're going to have as an agency if we don't get out of the Portland and white bubble. If our job is to puncture culture and create it.
I'm gonna make a line about it being.
Talking to ourselves.
I know that
I am very about it
home,
being
very
personal.
with my family and with my friends than I am at work. And I've said I want that to stop. I want my children to be able to appreciate and be proud of the culture they come from, not feel like they have to leave it behind.
Every man and woman
Definition.
needs to feel that they have
I don't know that that's working either.
They have a
That's
right.
It's killing me.
to be respected and have
Gotcha.
a right to live up to their potential.
This larger meaning, this larger context, and it's really about humanity, it's about people.
I dare you to try it. I dare you to go to that deep, dark place in your soul where you know you hide your truest feelings. Go there acknowledge those things and then share them. And see what reactions you get, because they might not be the ones you expect.
So you can see it's a very personal experience. We're going to try and cover some of that with this.
Wow, so when we partnered, all of those conversations that you saw there and hundreds more in the Portland office and the New York office, all those conversations were happening. They just weren't happening with each other. These were conversations that people have in the parking lot, that they have in their own journal, that they just internalize. And particularly when you sit down and you have to make real decisions about work together, these are still conversations running in the back of your head that you're just not checking in on. And so the how has to be a way that encourages people to actually have the conversations that we're having solo or we're having in our affinity groups. Okay, so shift up again 3% that women have with women, but just have decided that men are just not going to understand, or we're going to go through the things that we go through that cause women to have to keep, coming up with a different illustration, or it must be something wrong with them, And so this reality is something that can very easily be cracked, but you're not going to get it in an hour. You're not going to get it in 2 hours. And you're not even going to get it in 2 days. But at least in 2 days, you will never forget that you got it. And the question then becomes, are you going to practice? Are you going to practice to the degree that it becomes a part of who you are? And that's what's happening. Okay, and so this practice means that we're going to use a protocol that's a common protocol, because each and every one of us in the room has our own protocol when we're called to the table to talk about gender, when we call to the table to talk about race. The problem is, imagine 25 nations coming together and having a conversation all in a different language. They're talking about the same thing, but they're using a different language. And so what Wyden and Kennedy decided was they were going to adopt one way that they were going to all practice having a conversation. And this practice here involved only 3 components: agreements, which are going to be the rules of engagement; conditions, which is going to be the trajectory; and a compass, which is going to be your internalized and your internal way of figuring out what's going on for you. Okay, how am I entering? What parts of myself am I activating? Am I using my whole self to be there? And then, where is everybody else who's in this conversation, and how do I get over there to them? Right? And so those 3 parts first start with this conversation that you have internally with yourself, intra. Okay, so you don't go out trying you're crazy on everybody else, particularly in the workplace, okay, because those scars run deep. And so the first practice is you got to talk to yourself. So long before Amy talked to Scott, her most intimate partner in the world, she was having conversations with herself about what it meant to be a white woman leading a school in Portland around environmentalism, right? And wanting to have a more racially diverse student population in a city that has the 19th largest indigenous population, but initially the environmental school never mentioned that all of our concepts of environment come from the indigenous, right? So you have to get clear about some of those things. And you have to find your own personal lack of traction and connection before you can actually go in and have a conversation with someone you care about. And so intra-racial means, and it's more likely in the way that race is set up in the United States, that the first people we're going to talk to are people who share our racial experience. And in that, you're going to get some diversity of perspective that you get to work with. So if dudes talk to dudes about our sexism, then when we go, we have already heard. When I talk to Scott, he might be a lot less sexist than I am. And I get the diversity of perspective here, so that when I actually engage across the gender line, I'm already composed and ready to have a conversation where the way I see the world is not going to be the way that the world is seen necessarily. Okay, and so that's what intra is, and after intra, we then go to inter. And the interracial conversation is where it really gets interesting. All right? And so we do it at 3 levels. We engage it, which is how you start the conversation. So there's stuff you talk about at the beginning. Okay? And then there's stuff you talk about at the end. So when Lovey does a privilege walk with you, first thing in the morning, for some people, they're just not ready. They need a little warm-up. Okay? And so this protocol does not start with the privilege walk. But you don't talk about race without talking about the privilege walk. So ultimately, if you haven't had that conversation, which is the deepening part, then you really haven't had a courageous conversation. Okay? And so what we want you to do is we want you to feel a little bit of it. So this is just in the backdrop, the agreements, and as they come up, there are 4 of them. This changes the norms, the rules for engagement. The 4 agreements, you stay engaged. Okay? You speak your truth, you experience discomfort, and you accept that when we finish in an hour, there's a lot more to do. Okay? And so for each of you here, just look at this and figure out which one of these would be hardest for you to hold on to when you're in that conversation about race and it's getting really hot. When you're in the conversation about gender inequity and it's getting really hot. Which of these agreements is going to be the agreement that you fall apart on? Because that's where you focus. Right? So if you have trouble getting uncomfortable and you're running stuff, then as soon as you get uncomfortable, the hard stuff is over. So if the leader of the organization runs for the hills when it gets uncomfortable, everybody else gets permission to run too. Right? And so those of us with the highest level, the most authority, we actually have to build the highest capacity for being uncomfortable. So that we stick around and we hold the discomfort, the disequilibrium, in a productive way. Okay, next one. The 6 conditions organized into 3 tiers: engage, sustain, and deepen. How you start it, how you hold on to it, and how you take it to the privilege walk. Okay, the first one is about personalizing. And that's what Scott was introducing there, and that's why you heard the personal narratives. Okay, so the whole thing starts in the organization when you start hearing people get public about their personal stuff. Okay? Get public, not in the parking lot, not just with the people who share that, not with your posse, not with your little crew, not in your little notepad, not under your breath, but you're actually saying it. So these conversations that you saw are normal conversations. Okay? They're not offensive, it's just the way the world works. If we're offended by life, then we're not going to be able to transform and get to the possibilities that we want. The second level is about the multiple perspective. Okay? And in that multiple perspective, we start engaging now and understanding. We learn how to listen in this part too. Okay, and you gotta listen because I don't have the experience of a woman. Okay, so what do I have to add to that? Okay, at the cutting edge, the woman knows what the woman experiences. People of color know what we experience. Okay, and so the worst thing is to get into a conversation and you gotta understand how the agency's not working for women and it's a bunch of dudes talking. What are we talking about? Right. So now, flip it, race. It's just, I just don't have a lot of capacity for white people to tell me what I'm experiencing every day. Or what you heard from your friend of color. Right? Because I don't need to hear their story because I'm trying to work out mine. It's like, oh yeah, I got a friend and he also got pulled over. I'm like, oh great. And now my blood pressure is running up for me and for your friend. Okay? So sustaining is about multiple perspective. And the third level, deepening, and that's what we talked about. That's the walk. Okay, so that's when we're talking about power and shifting power in the organization. Let's play with this a little bit. Okay? So we're going to just stay with the first one. I'm going to come to the compass at the end. Okay. All right, first one is personalizing. You got a little sheet of paper there. On side 2 of the paper, you see a box at the bottom. Okay, that's your little cheat sheet. You got the agreement, so you might circle the agreement. That's going to be hardest for you as you engage in a little work. And just sort of take a pulse on how you're feeling because we're going to do some work together.
Do you have any more of those?
That's a
Maybe.
question. There's one. There's one right there.
Yep.
Okay? All right, so every guy in this room should have handed your paper right on over there.
Yeah.
That's what 3% is. Okay? Women can't leave without paper. All right, engage. Personal, local, immediate, our personal experiences. Here we go. All right, so this question, how much of your life is impacted by race? Okay? Okay? And as you are thinking about the translation, you could easily say how much of your life is impacted by gender. Okay? But we haven't done this work very specifically and hard yet in the intersection space. We started with race. We built the protocol through race, and we're applying it across the different diversity categories. Okay, so Scott, there we go. How much of my life is impacted by race? You have to answer this question between 1 and 100. It's a percentage. What percentage of your life is impacted by race? Everybody needs a number in the box. If you don't have a piece of paper, I'm sorry, just draw a box like this and put a number in it. Okay, and after you have your page, I'm going to require some engagement. You have your number. I want you to share your number with at least one other person, a couple of people preferably beside you, because it's also accountability to make sure that you're still going along with it. You haven't disengaged. You haven't backed out. Okay, so everybody has to have a number. You have to share it with a couple people around you. What's your number? Don't tell them how you got there. Just tell them what the number is. All right, no explanation. Nope.
Yeah. It should just be numbers.
You want to explain it? I know. No explanation. Come on back. You're going to miss it. All right. Now, if you had a couple of days, you would get to explain it, right? And I would give you a process for explaining it because, hold on, because what happens here is now everyone's invested in their number. Okay? And they want to share their number. And when you get into a pair or a table group, everyone's interested in sharing their own number, not really interested in listening to anybody else's. Right? And so we actually have to put in some new ways of being so that this can work out. And we don't have time to do that. All right? So I'm not going to do the exercise that way. I'm going to do it a different way. You shared your number because I want to make sure that you're actually engaging. Okay? And that means now that somebody beside you, if you didn't write a number down, knows that you're not playing. Okay? And they should just ask you, why are you even here? Okay? Right? Because this is the easy part. Here we go. All right? I want you to stand if your number is between 1 and 10. Stand up. I want you to stand, stay standing, if your number is between 1 and 20. Stand if it's between 1 and 30. Okay? Now this is just data, folks. Just data. Keep standing. Okay? 1 and 40. All the way on up to 49. Stand. Okay? You are Group A. Have a seat. All right, Group B, stand if you have 50. Okay? All right, Group B, I don't trust y'all. I'm kidding. 50 is always that one. It's like, all right, 50 people, you're Group B. Okay? You're Group B. All right, now I want you to stand if your number is 100. Go on 98 to 100. 98, 100, 95, 100, y'all. Stand. Okay? You're Group C. 95 to 100. Y'all sit down there. Okay? You're Group C. Okay? Now, Group B, I want you to look at Group C. Go on, Group C, B. Y'all are my researchers. You 50 people. You're sort of looking at it, right? All right? All right, so my 50% group, okay, you have now looked at Group C. Okay, Group C, have a seat. Group A, stand up. 50%ers, look at Group A. Remember, 50%ers, Group A is 1 to 49. Group C is 95 to 100. 5 spaces, Group C. 49 spaces, Group A. Okay? I'm going to show you Group C again. This is Group A. Thank you, Group A. Group C. Okay? Where are my 50%ers? Raise your hands. 50%ers, stand on up. There we go. Y'all the researchers, okay? All right, group C, sit down. What do you know about the difference between group A and group C? Shout it out, Chris.
It is disproportionately larger in group C, the amount of spaces.
Yeah, so it's a lot of people standing for 5 spaces versus 49, right? That's important, okay? Thank you, Chris. No, not all group C. Come on, David. No, David. You're not like with Chris. What did you notice? What did you notice, David?
There are a lot of African Americans in group C.
Woo! Say it again.
There are a lot of African Americans.
Unpack a lot. Yeah, so you're looking at a room, right, and African Americans is a small number anyway, about 13% in the best world, right? Okay, but you saw disproportionately African American people standing up in the 5% group, right? The group that only have 5 places, right? Okay? I can't see your name. Yanyi, thank you. And what did you notice?
I think group C was a lot more mixed race.
Mixed race, which means what? Unpack that for me.
Diverse.
More diverse, more racially diverse. Okay? I can't see your name. You don't have a name tag on.
No, I lost it.
You're sneaking in the 3%? All right, what did you notice?
Pretty much everything that everyone.
So it's worth restating. What did you notice?
That the second group was much more diverse.
Racially diverse.
Yeah.
And?
Understand across the board. And the first group was predominantly white.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. And the reason why I said restated is because you're going to have different terminology, and for some people they're going to get it the way you said it, some people are going to get it the way Chris said it. Let's have a hand for the 50% group. All right? And so what that means and why that happens, and this is the introduction to the conversation, is because everybody's number, get this, is 100. Okay, now what does that mean that more African Americans were standing on 100, more people of color were standing on 100, okay, but even though more people of color are standing, there's so few of us, we can't stand large enough to let the world know that you got it wrong. Right, and what that means essentially is that race is always impacting you. But what many people do is they change the words to suit their own circumstance. So they see it and they say, how much of my life is impacted by racism? That's different. Right? And so that's different, and then that defines, based on your experience, how you're going to answer it. So if you're white, you're not going to have a big number there. Okay, you might have a little conversation, which we get to on day 2, called this thing, mythologically, reverse racism, that doesn't exist. Okay, that's day 2 stuff. That's like deepening. Okay? But when you're here, you got to know that you can't change the word race to racism because they're very different. Okay, race is positive, negative, race is all of that stuff. The second thing is that race is all-inclusive. So no one gets to keep going along, at least in a 10-year interval in the United States, without declaring race. And if you're born here, you're declared race before you leave the hospital. And even which hospital you get declared race in is often decided for you because of racism in society. Okay, and so all of us have race, and it's always with us, and there's no process that we get to take it off. So this is part of the 102. And finally, and particularly this becomes tricky in 3% because we're so heightened in our thinking about gender that some of you were doing a pie chart. And you're like, well, this part's my race, and this part's my gender, and this part's my religion, and this part I don't want to talk about. Okay? And you sort of get it all up to 100 altogether when in reality, you're always your gender. You're always all of those parts. Okay? So it's 100. All right, but when people are coming from different perspectives, and if you think it's low impact, which means race matters, then you're going to be likely to say, this has nothing to do with race. And when you say this has nothing to do with race, because your number was 20, which means 80% of the time, this has nothing to do with race, okay, that's when it really matters. Because that's the moment when we're unwilling to explore how race is impacting what's going on. In the 20% time that we all get, you know, when Charlottesville blows up, we all know it's about race. Okay, but that's not genius stuff there. It's really those subtle meetings, you know, when you're in creative and you're really trying to make some decisions and you can't have those conversations, that's really about race. Okay.
Turbo. Scared to touch anything. So we've got random acts of equity. We're trying to think of those things show up, especially at Wyden, in lots of ways. We have groups that have started around gender. We've had groups that have started around a gay club. We've got a group called WK ACT that's tried to build up what does activism look like for people in Portland, Oregon. And all these individual acts are great. They're happening in lots of places. But we need to get that movement from how do we get from these random acts onto a more systemic change. And we need that systemic change to really happen. How do we create that sense of belonging for everybody? So we needed to move beyond the singular. We took our focus on hiring to sort of a larger area of focus. And there's 5 things, and I'm going to kind of pick up because there's something at the end we want to make sure that we have time for. So there's 5 things, and these aren't new to anybody. I'm sure that most of you have programs like this in your companies as we speak. We've got to focus on education. We've got to focus on talent pipeline, on talent management, on partners, and on business, right? Again, how many people have something like this at their work already? Like this is not, we're not reinventing the wheel here, right? What's happening is we're taking Courageous Conversations through all of these. How does Courageous Conversations and how does this work show up in our talent pipeline? Like partnering with AdColor and MAPE and the Marcus Graham Project, those are all things that lots of people are doing. How do we bring the Courageous Conversations and the individual personal beliefs on people into these pieces? How does that show up in talent management? How does it show up in working with business partners and supplier diversity? How does it work up with our clients' needs? So we've got a few examples of that. And I also want to talk about some of the things that we're asking a little bit above and beyond. So everyone has these 5 areas of focus. Here's what we're asking of each and every employee at Wyden Kennedy. And these came, it's another 5 things. And these came from the day, probably a week after the first group of 80 went through Courageous Conversations. It was impactful. And we were like, whoa, how do we take this to a larger scope of the agency, and how do we deal with all these people and where it gets unpacked at home and gets unpacked at work and gets unpacked on the playground. And so we're asking things that are a little bit different. We're asking, and you've heard this a bunch today, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I've done it in my home. I've done it on conversations with Glenn. I've done it in conversations around gender. It works. Lots of levels, right? Your voice is your story. Share it. Everyone has that individual voice and that individual perspective. We need people to be able to share that. Hire someone different than you on your team. Again, in theory, this sounds like, okay, but what we really need to do is have somebody, how do you hire somebody that challenges you and challenges your own thought beliefs? That's a perspective that's going to make better work. Create a culture of belonging on your team. I have an intern right now who knows nothing about advertising, like 0. He's really excited. He wants to be a collegiate basketball athlete, and he wants a career in modeling. Who doesn't? He actually, I feel like he has a chance. But in my role and at our place, I was like, here, you need to sit down with our Nike account team, or let's go talk to business affairs. Like, there's so much more into this contract bit around being cast to work and get pictures taken of you. And so it's opened up a dialogue and a conversation where he now comes to me with other questions that I would never think. So it's like, how do you draw people in just by listening to their interests? And make room for the unheard voice. This is also another big one. We've invited people to come in on presentations and look at scripts or write scripts or look at the work. How do we get that extra view on the work to make it better? I've got a few examples that we're going to look at how that ties into things. So last summer, Wyden Kennedy kind of stepped out of the safe zone of like, let's be quiet, there's an issue. The brutal murders in the summer of 2016 led us. We actually had someone write an all-agency email, so this ties into like this personal growth. Write an all-agency email that went to everybody. Agency emails are a whole different story at Wyden. That's probably a whole different session at a different conference, actually. They get used a lot. But we took that and we used it as a moment to not be quiet, where it's safe, and to put it on WK.com for a week. It's a bold statement, and it ties into, we talk about like talent pipeline. This made people interested, like, oh, that's the kind of place I want to work, right? It ties into those other areas of focus. This is the spot Nike equality. Again, another place pulls into talent pipeline. How do we find people that want to work on this work? We create works where we had a spot for Nike equality where we said, here's the equality that happens on the court, on the field. What's that look like off? Why can't it be the same? This is a spot from the New York office for the Atlantic called Typecast, where we sort of inflected on 4 different characters talking about the perception and what it looks like to typecast. This is a great example of how do we take people from one office, how can they carry that conversation to another office? So we had some folks in our Portland office working in our New York office. This is a great way to see how do we maintain that talent. We can move them around to other offices, work on other pieces of work. This is the stress test campaign for Secret, Procter & Gamble client. We challenged some of the norms around gender identity, and actually I'm going to play this one for you. Sorry. I think we're okay. Like if we run over a little bit long, they ran long. I think we're okay. Do the compass, don't you think? It's just this and PNG.
Stress tested for women.
This ties into working with our clients. What are our client needs? How can we push with our clients? This last one's a great one. I'm a little kind of too excited to share this. This is Procter & Gamble Olympics. The spot came out yesterday. Had to pull some strings to get it to show about and talk about it today. So that's why I'm excited. We're going to actually do this one a little bit different. I think we have the time to do it. First of all, this is through the lens of moms, which has always been the start of the brief. So talking about moms sponsoring the Olympics. And they examine bias. And how do we look at bias on not what necessarily divides people, but what actually brings people together. I'm going to let Glenn intro this.
So we're going to workshop this one, all right? And this is what we're trying to get to be the everyday experience. So when you're looking at creating this conversation, you have the agreement, the conditions, and the compass. We look at the first tier. So we're going to go to the compasses now. And as you watch this spot, and the hope is, because it was only released yesterday, you might not have seen this, okay? And so it's fresh eyes. And the fresh eyes can be this example of Charlottesville that occurred. It could be anything, really, you know, that summons your racial consciousness. So you're going to engage. Okay, and the compass is saying essentially, first and foremost, just note where you're coming from. How are you entering into this? The compass gives 4 different ways to enter in. And therefore, there's some non-discrete overlapping ways as well. But for many of us, you know, it's just, I enter in through my head, okay, which is an intellectual pursuit. So my thinking quadrant is about questions and wonderings. It's about, you know, theories. It's about all kinds of examples that are typically third person removed from self. Okay? And none of these, as I describe them, even though I'm biased because I don't enter into thinking quadrant, I enter in through feeling quadrant, so you'll hear it in my voice, but I really don't mean to bias any of them. They're all representing the same amount of space, and they represent the same amount of importance, okay? So thinking just means I'm entering in through my head versus feeling. I was socialized and raised with my family growing up in West Baltimore to enter in through feeling. Okay, when things popped off in Baltimore, my family didn't sit down with a textbook. They didn't, you know, quote some people and so forth. You know, they said like, "Shit, this just happened," and you know, it was just that's what was going on. So I got all the emotion of it. And then when I started having my own experiences, I could like sit down with them. You know, and I was too young to, you know, use those words, but I felt that kind of stuff. And that's what the feeling quadrant is. It's emotional. So we enter in through emotion. Over here is relational. Okay, and so when you see something going on, these are the protesters. All right, and they just want to go out and picket, and they want to write letters, and you know they want to do some stuff. They want to connect it to other things that have occurred. They want to call somebody up and have a conversation. Those are the acting people. And over here, the believing people. This is morality. This is the right and wrong of it. Okay, and so right away there's a justification in terms of your moral fiber. And is this a right thing? So you're going to see a commercial and you're going to look at it and you're going to go, that's wrong. Or wow, that's exactly what needs to happen. That's the believing quadrant. And the thing about the compass that it exposes to us is just how we come in. And so many times we're stuck in conversation or lack of conversation because we're entering from two different quadrants. Feeling people have a hard time having conversation with thinking people, initially, okay? And acting people sometimes just really piss off believing people, okay? They're so busy over here, right? And these folks up here just want to really get into, you know, sort of the philosophical, the deep-seated, you know, and they want to have some belief conversations. These people out here, you know, making posters. Okay, and so this is often an important way of also making sure that you're coordinated. Do your actions align with your beliefs? Okay, and so the second thing with the compass is not just to notice where you are, but to get centered. And get centered means that I'm going to be more than my feelings. Okay, get centered doesn't mean that I lose my feelings. It means that I explore a deeper and a broader, more expansive dimension of myself. Okay? And by me doing that, by me going center, I also get connected with people who are in different quadrants. Okay? Because by me activating my thoughtfulness about what's going on in Charlottesville, okay, for all the people who have a lot of questions and want data and want, you know, all of that, I can connect to it because I want some data too. It just wasn't primary for me. And I have different data that I might want. Okay? So when I get to the center and I look around, I start to understand, because of my own process there, what the experience of others is. And when I'm practicing in courageous conversation, I don't wait for others to come to me for the conversation. I meet them where they are. Because I can go into any of those boxes. I can be activist. I can be deep philosophically. I can be in my emotions and my feelings. And I can get thoughtful. Okay? So as you watch this spot now, with the compass that you have right there in front of you, when you come out of the conversation, when the commercial goes off with the person sitting next to you, I just want you to tell them, which quadrant are you in? Okay? Which quadrant are you in? You're not going to answer what you're saying and what you're, you know, what's going on, but where are you entering the conversation from now? Okay?
Ooh, child.
1 minute. 1 minute or something. We're definitely done after this.
Personally is the one.
Yeah.
All right, just really quickly tell your partner which quadrant are you in.
The compass.
All right, not why, okay? Because that's a later conversation, right? Now, here's the issue also. Just like the group of 5%, or the 95 to 100 that stood up that were largely disproportionately people of color, women tend to enter in through feeling. And when the organization is situated on this side, because we promote and we value people who enter in through thinking and acting, we diminish people of color. We diminish women. We doubly diminish women of color. So when you allowed yourself, you could pick that ad apart and, you know, do all your things that y'all do, okay? All right? Or you could get human, right, and get some feeling. And when we start here as an organization, because this is where we're least practiced, we actually start doing some of our best work.
We're out of time. Thank you. We'll be around for questions.